Good day, everyone. J'ouvre maintenant la séance. Bienvenue à la réunion numéro 104 du Comité permanent des comptes publics de la Chambre des communes. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Members are attending in person, in the room, and remotely using the Zoom application. Reminder that all comments should be addressed to the chair. Conformément à l'article 108.3G du règlement, le comité se réunit aujourd'hui dans le cadre de son étude sur le compte public du Canada 2023, renvoyé au comité le mardi 24 octobre 2023. Before I welcome our guests, I just want to inform members that I found it necessary to split this meeting in two because several witnesses were just not available. Plus, on top of that, you can see we have a full house of witnesses, and we didn't think we could fit more people around the table. So, we're going to do about an hour of hearings today on the public accounts 2023, and we'll reserve our second hour for a later date. I'll also have an update at the end of the meeting with respect to the Auditor General's upcoming tabling of reports to Parliament. But without further ado, I'd like to welcome our witnesses. From the Office of the Auditor General, Karen Hogan, Auditor General of Canada, Sana Garda, Principal, and Etienne Matt, Principal. From the Treasury Board, Secretariat, Monia Lahaye, Assistant Controller General, Financial Management Sector, or Monia Lahaye, pardon, Assistant Controller General, Financial Management Sector, Blair Kennedy, Executive Director, Government Accounting Policy and Reporting, Diane Parasini, former Executive Director, Government Accounting Policy and Reporting. From the Department of Finance, Evelyn Dancy, Assistant Deputy Minister, Fiscal Branch. Export Development Canada, Mayreed Lavery, President and Chief Executive Officer. From the Development Finance Institute Canada, FinDev Canada, Laurie Kerr, Chief Executive Officer, and David Bamji, Vice President and Chief Strategy Engagement Officer. I understand just three of the five have opening remarks that will go to a maximum of 5 minutes. After that, we'll proceed to a round of questions. Just for members, I plan to do 2 rounds, which will give the government members and official opposition 3 spots, and the NDP and the Bloc Québécois 2 spots each. So without further ado, Ms. Hogan, you have the floor for up to 5 minutes, please. But I understand your remarks are brief today, so over to you, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very brief, actually, in the interest of making sure that committee members have as much time as they'd like to ask questions. My opening remarks from our first hearing were distributed to all the members, and with that, I'll just tell you that we're happy to answer any questions the members might have.
Thank you very much. Next up from the EDC, Ms. Lavery, you have the floor for up to 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président et membres du comité, de m'avoir invité aujourd'hui. I'm looking forward to this.
Thank you, members. I'm looking.
2023 Public Accounts of Canada, one of the government's key accountability documents. For those less familiar, Export Development Canada is a Crown corporation that operates with a mandate to support and grow the country's export trade. Canada is a trading nation. Together, imports and exports represent 68% of the country's GDP, with exports specifically accounting for 34% of GDP. EDC supports this critical driver of our economy through a suite of financial solutions to help mitigate risks for Canadian exporters and investors, as well as through our knowledge products like webinars and digital content. Together, these offerings give Canadian companies the tools they need to reduce financial risk, the capital to enter and invest in new markets with confidence, and ultimately to grow internationally. As the committee may be aware, EDC has been consistently financially self-sustaining throughout our 80-year history and regularly pays a dividend to the Government of Canada. We operate on financially sustainable principles, always ensuring our work complements that of private market bankers and insurers. Our mandate and our strategy are helping Canadian companies. In fact, last year our economics team enlisted the support of Statistics Canada to help better understand the value we provide to our customers. This seminal study found Canadian exporters receiving EDC support generated 22% more revenue, had 15% higher employment, and 5% greater employee productivity than similar exporters who were not EDC customers. Transparency and accountability are central to our values, principles and practices at EDC. As Canada's export credit agency, we have a responsibility to the public. We disclose information about our business in a manner that balances the information interested Canadians seek with the confidentiality required by our customers. This extends from reporting on sustainability targets to proactive disclosures on travel and hospitality expenses to individual financing transactions, and from reporting on environmental targets to publishing our integrated annual report, which includes the financial statements the Officer of the Auditor General audits each year. Beyond facilitating accountability and oversight, these practices are fundamental to building trust with Canadians, our stakeholders, and our shareholder, the Government of Canada. Our reporting to our Minister includes quarterly reporting on transactions broken down by province and territory, industry, customer segment and region, among other categories. We also provide regular reporting on the Canada Emergency Business Account, or CEBA, a pandemic programme, and require the Minister's approval of our capital and operating budgets, as well as our corporate plan that details how we plan to execute against the Minister's Statement of Priorities and Accountabilities. Our shareholder appoints members to EDC's Board of Directors, a deeply experienced group of business professionals who oversee our direction and management and who support the achievement of organisational objectives. Je vous remercie de m'avoir accordé le temps pour
Thank you for giving me this time to share some information about EDC.
Where I'm also here with colleagues from FinDev Canada, which is a subsidiary of EDC and of which I am the chair. They are here to answer questions related to FinDev Canada. I look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much. And up now from FinDev Canada, Ms. Kerr, you have the floor for up to 5 minutes, please.
We hadn't prepared a remark.
Yep.
No, that's okay. Okay, so I caught that at the end, but I just want to double check then, so all right. Very good. We'll turn to our first round. Mr. Genuis, you have the floor, and I understand you might be splitting your time, but I'll let you notify me if that's the case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This committee and Parliament in general have been seized for some time with the Arrive scam scandal. There have been many shocking revelations over the previous months. The latest, further, is that one of the people at the center of this scandal was both an external contractor receiving money on ArriveCAN and a government employee. At the same time, was receiving millions of dollars, supposedly as an external contractor for what work we still don't know, and was a government employee. And the government apparently doesn't know enough about who its employees are in order to have noticed this at some point earlier in the process. With that in mind, Mr. Chair, and I do hope this is a simple matter of housekeeping, I would like to see, before I move on to my questions, if we have the agreement of the committee that we issue a summons for Mr. Yao to appear before the committee within 7 days and for at least 2 hours. I hope that's simply a matter we can have agreement of the committee on so we can move on.
So just, I've stopped the clock, and I'll turn to members in a second. So I informed Mr. Genuis beforehand this motion would be something he could table today. It is not the business before the committee. He is seeking unanimous consent to move on this. So I look for members. If there's a, I was going to say, Ms. Shannon, if there's a government member that wants to speak to it, you're welcome to. But you can speak to it, you can accept it or reject it.
As a member of this committee, I object to a motion of that nature being sprung on us in that way. And no, I do not give unanimous consent.
All right. Yeah. So, Ms. Genuis, you've got 5 minutes left. As you know, I give members discretion. You're welcome to speak to your time, but we will not move on this motion. I can consider it that you presented. It can come up at another time of committee business, but it will not be dealt with here. back to you for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair. I thought this would have been a matter of obvious and simple housekeeping that the committee, as part of its ArriveCAN work, would want to hear from Mr. David Yao. I'm sorry to see the Liberals blocking us from moving forward on this in an expeditious manner, but Conservatives will bring this back to the committee at the earliest opportunity in order to proceed with a decision on summoning Mr. Yao to appear before the committee. The fact that he was able to be both a Arrive scam contractor and a government employee, and that supposedly nobody noticed, is really the height of absurdity. Unfortunately, with the Liberals blocking this, it'll be a notice of motion for the moment, but I will bring it back at the earliest opportunity. The notice of motion is that the committee issue a summons for Mr. David Yao to appear before the committee within 7 days and for at least 2 hours. And with that, I will share the rest of my time with Mr. Lawrence.
Mr. Lawrence, you have 4 minutes remaining on the clock, please.
Thank you. And it's a pleasure to be back here at Public Accounts. Pleasure to see you again, Ms. Hogan. And my questions will focus, will be directed towards you. So thank you for your work with respect to the ArriveCAN application. I think a well-written, well-done report. We are here today to discuss the public accounts, but in sort of the broader context of that, after seeing what you saw in the ArriveCAN review and audit, in which I believe, if I'm not misquoting, you said it was some of the worst bookkeeping you've ever seen in your career, are you concerned that that might exist in other departments where if we take a deeper look into it, and because it certainly gives me pause as to what else is going out in other government departments?
So I agree that it's actually given me, it's caused me to reflect on bookkeeping in more general across the public service. But for several years, I have been involved, even before I was Auditor General, with the audit of the Government of Canada's financial statements. And we spend a large amount of time in many of the very large, significant departments. And bookkeeping and record keeping is well done. There are thousands of employees across the public service who contribute to the public accounts of Canada, and it is usually very well done. And one of the comments I did make around ArriveCAN is that it was a bit of a head scratcher for me as to why this all happened. I believe part of the pandemic contributed to it, the need to move quickly to support Canadians. The flexibility that the Secretary of the Treasury Board afforded the public service. However, I think what was forgotten was that it came with a reminder that public servants should demonstrate due diligence and document their decisions, and that's really what fell through here during the ArriveCAN development and implementation.
Thank you, Ms. Hogan. My concern is that if, and maybe you can rebut this, and that's fair, but for the audit that was requested by the Conservative Party, of which your department willfully obliged, we may not have ever become aware of the missing, of the terrible bookkeeping, and I'm using that very kindly, I think, and diplomatically. It could be far worse, and I think many commentators have pointed to that. So how can you say, with respect, Ms. Hogan, with any type of confidence, that this isn't going on in other government departments?
I'm not sure I said that I felt confident it wasn't happening in other departments. I felt that in the past, what I have seen has been public servants who really care about making sure the books and records of Canada are well maintained. This is a situation that I have not encountered before, to see such a glaring disregard for what I think are some of the most basic elements that you would see in record keeping, in project management. There were failures at so many levels during the ArriveCAN that I think every layer of management within the Canada Border Service Agency should feel responsible and figure out what happened. I just caution that we shouldn't add more rules to complicate things as we try to address the weaknesses and the failures that we found in ArriveCAN.
With those comments, we need to hold those who are accountable. Once again, with your considerable experience and expertise, is there any advice you could offer to this committee in sussing out, if there is any, And I agree with you. I think the vast majority of public servants are doing a great job and working. But if there's one more Arrive scam out there, that's one more too many.
Your question, please.
What advice would you offer this committee?
Well, I think the committee is doing it's what it's meant to do. It's trying to figure out what happened and what went wrong, and then how can the public service do better. I think that's one of the amazing things about the federal public service here in Canada, that accountability and transparency are always at the forefront, even when something goes wrong, so that we can all find a solution to move forward. So I think the committee has spent a lot of time studying this, and hopefully will conclude with a report that will provide good recommendations to the government.
Thank you very much. Ms. Shanahan, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. And I just want to put on the record again, so my colleagues understand that when we have members of this committee that pull stunts, such as we just saw from Mr. Genuis, trying to put a motion and get unanimous consent, it is disrespectful to the members of this committee because we have discussed many matters here. We have been able to come to agreement on the study of, quite frankly, a wide range of topics that not, in my experience, were normally part of public accounts, but again, with the consultation of all members, we have come to that conclusion. So I just want to put that on the record that I'm disappointed with that stunt, and we will see what comes of it. I now turn to the Auditor General, and I wish to thank her once again for the excellent work that she has put forward. I was traveling overseas, as I mentioned, and I've heard very good things. I had questions about public accounts and how we operate and how the independence of our institutions is so it's something that is much admired, and I was asked many questions about it. And so I'd like the Auditor General to tell this committee, and indeed Canadians and people around the world, once and for all, is there any political interference with the Office of the Auditor General? And when I ask that, it's because we had a suggestion here that it was because members of Parliament asked for or demanded that a certain political party demanded an audit, that it was done. Is it not in the purview of the Auditor General's office, indeed, to decide independently of Parliament what audits will be done?
So it's very clear in the Auditor General Act that the decision to carry out our discretionary audit work, which is performance audits, is at my discretion. I should be able to choose who we audit, when we audit, and how we audit. Most of our financial audit work, however, is provided to us through legislation, whether it be through the Financial Administrations Act or through the Auditor General Act or through enabling legislation of Crown corporations, like in the case of Export Development Canada, we would be named in their act as an auditor, as their auditor. We always, because I am accountable to Parliament, take very, very careful reflection on motions that are passed in the House, motions that are passed in committee, and weigh those in the lake of information that we put together to determine what we audit next and where to go. But it is foundational to our independence that we get to choose where we audit, who we audit, and when we audit them.
And indeed, and I certainly don't want to put you on the spot in that way, but is it entirely possible that you would have conducted the audit of ArriveCan as you well and should do so without any call necessarily from this committee or from Parliament?
I often get asked questions, and I wish I had a crystal ball to tell you what I would have done. Hindsight is lovely as well, so I can't tell you whether I would have decided that this was the next audit or one of the most important audits that we should focus on, but I can tell you that we pay attention to what's going on. So, for example, there was a great deal of concern around Sustainable Development Technology Foundation. We talked to the department responsible, and they took some action. We watched that play out, and when we saw the preliminary report, we felt that more was needed. And so, as you know, we've started an audit on SDTC. So just because we don't respond immediately doesn't mean we aren't listening and paying attention to what's going on around us.
Well, thank you very much for that, because I think that can be reassuring to Canadians that the Office of the Auditor General is on the job, and indeed I agree with you that the scope of the ArriveCan contracting situation is of great concern. We had the procurement ombuds here the other day, and we had to ask him several times to clarify the statements that were being made by the leader of the official opposition, saying that 76% of subcontractors didn't do any work. In other words, they were paid and they didn't do any work, and the ombuds was very careful to correct that statement, saying it had to do with a bait and switch gambit that the contractors were doing. Auditor General, how do you feel when your words are taken out of context?
Well, the English and French languages are complex, and we try so hard to make sure that our reports are easy to understand, but at times they are misunderstood. And I watched the testimony of the procurement ombuds, and I thought he was very clear in explaining his words. And I would hope that all parliamentarians and all Canadians would remember that he tried to clarify what it was, and I would do the same should it happen to me.
And can you just describe somewhat, because the spring reports will be coming out in a few weeks. We look forward to seeing those. How is it that you and your office go about constructing your message when you're? Are you looking for that hit? Are you looking for those headlines? What is it that you're trying to convey to Canadians when you issue your reports?
So when we do our work, we try to be very factual about what we saw, what we hear, provide some background information about the subject matter, and we try to balance our message. When we can talk about the good work that the public service does, we do so, and when we identify opportunities for improvement, we'll explain them and issue recommendations. So it's my goal to make sure that our reports are balanced, so that we can encourage confidence and trust in the federal government when it's needed, but also identify opportunities for improvement.
Thank you very much. That is the time. Suivant, c'est Madame Secret Desgagnés. Vous avez la parole pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
You have 6 minutes. Thank you, and thank you to our witnesses. I'm going to go directly to my question for EDC. And good afternoon, Ms. Lavery. This is the first time I've seen you here at the committee. I have a number of questions for you. First of all, let's start with the Canada Emergency Business Assistance Program. You know it well, I'm sure. With the interpretation, we lose a little time always. So you were mandated by the government to oversee that program, but through various articles, we've seen that Accenture was a firm that was hired by EDC to manage the program. Is that true?
Is a contractor to EDC for that program.
Combien est-ce que Accenture a reçu?
How much money did Accenture receive from EDC to manage that program?
The latest data is for the full contract value from 2000 when we started the program. There were approximately 31 contracts awarded to Accenture for a total value of 208 million.
280 millions?
280 million?
208. 208.
Parfait, 208.
208. How is it that those contracts are not on the open government site as required by the transparency criteria?
So the contracts are available on MERX as from December 2021. Prior to that, they were not published, but they were available through EDC.
Et pourquoi ne sont-ils pas sur le site du gouvernement?
Why aren't they on the open government site?
At that time, EDC did not report their contracts on the site.
D'accord.
Okay. because what we are learning is from the article, $67 million was spent, but from an access to information request, the contracts for Accenture to manage this government program that was created during the pandemic was $106 million. We couldn't find that online, but only through access to information. So the question that I have is, what did Accenture do to earn $208 million? After all, the system was easy. Financial institutions like Desjardins would lend money, so there wasn't any money coming out of the government. What did Accenture do to earn so much money?
Thank you for the question. So, as I said, there were 31 contracts that covered a number of activities that Accenture performed over the period for when the CEBA program was launched, which was April 2020. At that time, the program was anticipated. It was anticipated that EDC would need support to actually engage what ended up as being 233 financial institutions to establish with them a program to be in receipt of funds from the Government of Canada to then onward distribute to the what ended up as 898,000 companies across Canada. That program was subsequently amended 6 times. To enable that program to be facilitated, there were significant legal agreements that had to be defined with individual financial institutions, as well as some institutions in combination. As well, at different points in the program, we established that we needed a call center to actually handle questions. At one point, the program was receiving 10,000 calls.
I'm sorry, but the call center didn't exist. The companies that didn't qualify couldn't find anybody to answer their question. And that was a complaint we heard over and over. Even the minister responsible for small business knows that it was a problem. So I repeat my question. What did Accenture basically provide to get that money? Nobody can make me believe that people that we need Accenture for doing these contracts, that they need all this money to help Canadian businesses to get $60,000 loans. So basically, I want to understand what Accenture has been doing. We need to look into this more deeply. The companies didn't get the answers they need. They couldn't communicate to find out about their whether they qualified. It was very badly managed, especially toward the end, and many companies asked for another year to refund the money. I know that there was a very high bankruptcy level, a 40% increase in 2023. So did we get value for what was spent on Accenture? Because we know that Accenture and EDC haven't managed this well. Can you share the information for this program that was created in 2020?
Yes, thank you for the question. Mr. Chair, do I have time to respond?
Yes, you do.
Thank you. So as I said, the call center was one of the individual activities that Accenture performed. However, there were many other activities to enable the exchange of information with regard to the loan holders, of which there were 898,000. They had to demonstrate an attestation, and as the program developed, they also had to provide expense data to enable eligibility to the program. All of that data had to be analysed and assessed for loan holders to be able to receive the individual loans. Accenture provided support for that. They also provided support for the exchange of data between the banks and EDC to enable reporting and transparency on the loans that were being provided, as well as the technology teams to actually facilitate money flows and the proper recording thereof. So there was significant staff augmentation as well to include items such as programming interfaces, as I mentioned, the call centre, the website, which was also available to recipients and potential recipients of CEBA during that time period.
Thank you. There was a request for documents, I believe. Is that something you could provide to the committee as well? So.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I can. There's actually been 2 order paper questions where all of the contracts with Accenture are detailed, and I'd be happy to provide them to the committee.
Thank you. That's very good. Turning now to Mr. Massey, joining us virtually. You have the floor for up to 6 minutes, please.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. My first question would be to Mr. Kennedy, I believe, with regards to the Phoenix Pay system that was irresponsibly activated and has really been one of the most morale killers with regards to the public service when you can't even pay people properly. And the Comptroller General was actually before and advised that there are going to be system modifications and adjustments to deal with the issue. So perhaps you can update us as to if that's happening. And one thing I always wondered is why did members of Parliament's paychecks never get affected by the Phoenix system, whereas the general public and the public servants continue to have problems at languish on?
If I may, I'll answer this question. Following up on what the Comptroller General said last fall, we take this very seriously, and it is being addressed jointly with the Office of the Chief Human Resource Officer and with the PSPC in terms of ensuring that this situation is resolved as quickly as possible. So there's teams working on this file, and the government recognizes that this is a huge issue we need to resolve. So,
well, we don't, be quite fair, they don't need to recognize, but has there been advancements? Is it better now, and by how much? And you're measuring that every year to eliminate this as a problem. My understanding is there still continues to be problems.
So to get the latest update, I can come back to you with more information on the latest status of the file.
I'd appreciate that very much. It's a very serious issue. And I think it's ironic that members of Parliament's paychecks were never affected. I'm sure if they had the same experience as the public service, it would receive a different treatment. That's for sure, in my opinion. Now, I'd like to ask about loss of property, public money and property. There's been identified about $235 million are attributed losses from damage and a number of different things. Do we look at issues on buildings and so forth and damage, whether it's weather-related or whether it's person-related, or do we distinguish between those losses? So say, for example, if climate change is affecting our property of our country and if that's measured at all?
Take that one. At this point in time, we aren't identifying within the public accounts the actual reason for a loss of public property. There's just high-level information. It would be with the departments as to the reason for the loss. So definitely there were some losses due to hurricanes, I believe, or floods that were reported in last year's public accounts, but it's not necessarily identified at this point in time in the way it's tracked and reported for public accounts purposes.
Well, is there any thought about doing that? I mean, even for insurance purposes, we'd be identifying that? It just seems odd that we wouldn't attribute, because municipally, it's probably over 21 years ago as a city councilor, we used to at least identify what was actually destruction, which was weather-related, which was, related to a change of policy or something. And has there ever even been a thought of that?
As I mentioned, departments would have the information that would explain the nature of their losses. A lot of the government properties are self-insured, so there isn't the same regime with respect to making claims against an external insurance company. So I can't speak to what mechanics and processes are in place for within departments in that regard.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. Here's one of the reasons why is, so he'll give a specific example. Right now, CBSA, we've all seen the news of stolen cars out of the Port of Montreal. and they have not fixed their equipment for scanning in Montreal. 2 sets of scanning equipment are broken. So they moved the equipment right from Windsor, Ontario, now exposing, 35% of our daily trade comes through my riding here. So they moved the equipment to Montreal to deal with this. And so I guess wondering whether or not there's an assessment as to, why CBSA is not fixing this. And having to report perhaps back to the Treasury Board or somebody else if they don't have the money to try to get the money. So I'm just wondering if that's kind of where I'm getting at that, because it's pretty irresponsible not to fix the equipment. So either, we don't have enough money or it's negligence. And I just thought maybe somebody outside the department might need to look at this too.
So it is within the responsibility of the deputy head for the management of assets within the department. So those would probably be better questions that would be posed to the CBSA to discuss how and why assets are in the state which they are in.
Okay. Do you have any more time, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, 50 seconds, 5-0.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Just real quick with regards to, again, going back to the Phoenix pay system, if I could, because there was one other thing I wanted to ask about this. Have we had an assessment as to the overall expected cost that we need to project going on to fix the system? Has that been done in terms of that? And with that, when we contract out again, do we include models like this to show when we contract out versus in-house the extra expense from contracting out? Is that ever measured, or is that actually retained within our records so we don't do this again?
Well, as part of the approach for costing projects, the teams look at past experiences to inform the future. That's definitely an element that is considered. So that would be how they go about doing that. We don't look at it specifically right now.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Beginning our second round, turning to Mr. Brock, you have the floor for up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your attendance. We're almost 24 hours removed from Justin Trudeau's political embarrassment regarding the two-person firm run by Mr. David Yeo receiving almost $8 million.
Mr. Brock, I've stopped the clock. I have a point of order from Ms. Shanahan.
Yeah. Do we mention the full names? Oh, in committee, it's okay. Okay. Yeah.
All right.
No, it was an honest question.
She's only been here.
No, there, gentlemen. All right, that's Mr. Brock. I'll set you off from the top. 5 minutes. You have the floor, please. So.
Almost 24 hours removed from Justin Trudeau's political embarrassment that yet another two-person basement firm receiving $8 million in taxpayer funding. But to make the matter even worse, the person also receives a paycheck from the Government of Canada, an absolute embarrassment. So my question is both to the Treasury Board and to the Ministry of Finance. In light of this embarrassment, has Minister Anand, to the Treasury Board representatives, has Minister Anand asked you specifically in the last 24 hours if any employees in the ministry are working also as contractors?
Speaking from my perspective, I have not been engaged on that file at this point.
Not spoken to the ministry, to your knowledge?
She has spoken to the ministry.
In the last 24 hours in relation to this embarrassment?
I don't know what was discussed with the minister.
Okay. To your knowledge, has she been in contact with the ministry in the last 24 hours?
I don't know.
You don't know. The other representative from Treasury? Sorry, from Finance? I mean Treasury, not Finance. We have a few here from Treasury, right?
Yes.
Yes.
I have no knowledge either.
No knowledge as well. Okay. To the Ministry of Finance, has Minister Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister, in the last 24 hours reached out to ministry officials?
Point of order. Yeah. I'll let
Who's going to go first?
My colleague. I'll let my colleague take it.
What's the relevance? What is the...
That's not a point of order. Stop the stunts.
Mr. Brock. So, Mr. Brock is free to answer the questions. I think we just had a sample of what the answers are going to be. This is his time, and the witnesses are showing themselves to be more than capable of informing us what they know, and in this case, don't know. Mr. Brock, you have 3 minutes and 20 seconds left.
As Minister Freeland, in the last 24 hours, reached out and asked to know if anyone in the ministry is also receiving funds as contractors, yes or no?
To my knowledge, no.
To your knowledge?
To my knowledge, I'm just simply wouldn't know.
Have your respective ministries, in light of the news that you've heard in the last 24 hours, have you on your own, anyone here representing those ministries, on your own double-checked to see whether or not people are also moonlighting as contractors already on government payroll, yes or no?
For my part, no.
Treasury Board?
No for me as well.
Okay. I'm asking the Treasury Board to submit a list of all government employees that are also working as government contractors. Can you provide that within 15 days?
We will attempt to return the
yes.
information list.
I'll just pause. Yes, you can take note of the request and get back to us, please. Thank you.
To the Treasury Board, Minister Anita Anand announced in November the government, as crazy and ludicrous as this sounds, paid almost $700,000 to KPMG, a consultant, on their advice on how to cut costs on outside consulting fees. She indicated in November she actually promised Canadians that she would release the first wave of details that month. She did not do so. Why not?
I can't speak to that either. I was prepared to talk about the public accounts today. So I'm sorry, I don't have that
and that
information. We will have
and that is a perfectly acceptable answer. Yes. So, Mr. Brock, a minute 40 left.
Okay, Mr. Kennedy, any response?
No, the same. I'm not prepared to speak to that either.
All right. She also promised that there would be about a $15 million savings over 5 years from existing spending. Natural resources contract work was part of that department's contribution to the spending reduction effort. To the Treasury Board, have they begun work on the House motion that was passed yesterday on the full accounting of all direct and associated ArriveCan costs? Has the work started in light of the motion that was passed?
Again, I don't know. I was prepared to talk about the public accounts. I would assume they're working on finding information, but I am not
All right.
aware.
Will you, within 15 days, provide the House with an update as to the efforts at the Treasury Board to acquire those costs so that we can, as Canadians and parliamentarians, try to actually put a finite figure on the cost that the Auditor General was unable to determine? Her best guess was $60 million. That did not include subcontractors. That did not include actual monies paid for the federal public service. So this is very important to Canadians, and you will do so within 15 days. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Very good. That is your time. Turning out to Ms. Yip, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
So I'd like to direct this to Ms. Hogan. I just wanted to give you a second to finish. So Mr. Brock had just mentioned that he had inferred that it cost at least $60 million. And facts do matter, and this is a serious situation, and we see that the Conservatives are playing politics with this issue that shows how they are not so serious about it. Do you believe that when quoting you or your office that members have a responsibility to do so accurately and responsibly?
So I trust that everyone will quote our reports accurately. Once they've been tabled in the House of Commons, they're a matter of public record, and there's, they're there to be used for others as they would like. I guess what I would offer up is that our estimate of $59.5 million was one paid to all vendors that had a direct contractual obligation with the federal government. When they are not firms who are providing direct work but are hiring subcontractors, they are then expected to take those funds and disperse them to their subcontractors. We actually had an exhibit in our report to help understand the flow of funds. So I would offer that up as some information to help inform the committee members as they study the dollar value that we put on the app.
Thank you. The public accounts reported the deficit was $17.5 billion lower than forecasted. Given this fact and that we maintain both the lowest deficit and net debt to GDP ratio of any G7 country, what does that say about the direction of fiscal policy?
I'll take that question. I accurately have quoted that information for the government's perspective in all the documents, the fall economic statement or indeed budget 2023, continues to be the case that the government is putting forward a sound economic and fiscal plan that includes a fiscal anchor that the government is abiding by, which is the declining debt to GDP, net debt to GDP ratio over the medium term, which is our budgetary horizon. We also do long-term modeling that shows the continued downward trajectory, which is a key indicator around fiscal sustainability.
Well, that's good to hear. Ms. Hogan, funding your office has been extremely important as it allows you to continue the excellent work that you have been entrusted to do. During the first year of Harper, your budget was $78.6 million, and during the last year, it was only $81.8 million. When Pierre Poilievre was minister responsible for safeguard, oh yes, because I believe you set the trend.
All right.
Our democracy. He
Order,
did not
just-
ensure that officers.
Ms. Yip, I've stopped the clock. The floor is yours. We've settled this.
Okay, so let me just-
Yes, over to you. You have a minute, 50 seconds.
Okay, so let me repeat that again. When Pierre Poilievre was minister responsible for safeguarding our democracy, he did not ensure that officers of parliament were funding adequately. Can you explain to the committee how your office is funded and what adequate funding means for the work that you do?
So I think every year, if you look at what we spend, it's a little different. Our funding increases as our economic increases to employees and so on. I guess what I would offer up is we are part of the federal government, and we seek our funding as any other department does. And so we provide our annual budget to the Department of Finance, because that's the department to which my office reports through. This is why, you may recall, when I was initially appointed, I was seeking for more funding. We received the funding that I was looking for, but I also mentioned at that time that once everything settled, I think it was time to continue the quest for an independent funding mechanism for my office. I think it's a place where all agents of Parliament should have independent funding mechanisms. It ensures that we aren't turning to departments that we audit in order to receive the funding that we need. An independent funding mechanism would include an accountability mechanism that might be played right here by the Public Accounts Committee if they would like. Other countries have agents of Parliament that are funded independently. Here in Canada, some of the newer agents of Parliament who are established more recently, like the Parliamentary Budget Officer, has an independent funding mechanism outside of the core public service. So I think right now we haven't had issues with our funding since we received additional funding in 2021. But, you know, that could always be an issue going forward because we are in the mix with all the other departments across the Corps.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn. Suivante, c'est Madame Sécla-Dingé. This is going smoothly. We have booked the witnesses for an hour and 15 minutes, so I'm going to add a third but truncated third round, which will give the NDP and the Bloc an additional 2 minutes after their next rounds, and government and opposition members, official opposition members, 4 minutes. So, Madame Sécla-Dingé, vous avez présentement 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
You have 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead. Thank you. I would like to continue with my previous line of questioning. Ms. Levry, the call center you talked about, was it managed by EDC or by Accenture?
Donc, c'était à l'externe.
So it was outside. How many employees were there at the call center available, and what point?
There were a differing number of employees at the call center depending on the time of the program. So at the very early days, it was in ramp-up mode. I do believe, I would have to check, but I believe we reached up to 150 employees in the call center.
Trouvez-vous normal qu'un appel...
Do you find it reasonable for a call center to cost $146 million during 2.5 years of the pandemic?
Est-ce qu'on s'entend que c'est pas le site?
Because a website can't cost $146 million. Seems to be there's a problem.
So I'm not sure where the number of 146 million comes, and I do not have the costs.
D'un article du Globe.
This was an article in the Globe.
So I would have to validate the specific numbers. What I can say is at the peak of the call centre, it was in receipt of 10,000 calls a day. And just to be clear, the cost of a call centre is not just the employees in the call centre. It's actually the technology that supports the handling and the processing of calls. Because there were many items that required follow-up. It wasn't just the receipt of a call and the response thereto. There was actually actions that needed to be taken. It also includes the production of material to train the call centre, as well as other activities to ensure that people received the response they needed.
Madame Lavry.
Ms. Lavry. Once again, the companies were dealing directly with financial institutions. When they had questions, the financial institutions couldn't answer in some cases, and there was nobody for companies to turn to. That's well known. Everybody knows that, whether it's the Canadian Federation of Independent Business or the Quebec Chambers of Commerce, everybody knows that nobody could be found to answer the questions. I find it hard to believe there were 10,000 calls a day. And the second, why did people have to call a number managed by Accenture when they were dealing directly with financial institutions?
We have time for an answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. They actually were calling the call centre because at one stage in the program, actually I believe it was version 3 or 4 of CEBA, there were 6 versions. There was the expansion of the program to include a category called non-deferrable expenses. And that was a category whereby the recipient potentially of CEBA had to prove that they had expenses that they were no longer able to fund, that they'd had those in the past. So they were actually providing information, and depending on the sector, depending on the type of industry or the type of business, they were wanting to understand, would these expenses be eligible? So often there was many dialogues around whether expenses were eligible for the calculation and therefore to be in receipt of CEBA. The banks were not able to advise on that. The banks were there to ensure that the funds were appropriately distributed after eligibility had been determined. So that was conducted through the call centre.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Mr. Massa. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to ask a question about ArriveCAN and also training money for CBSA. They are related. $60 million went to this app, and as I noted, I'm on the Windsor-Detroit border. Just from me here are 3 crossings that are understaffed, and CBSA officers were not actually replenished during the pandemic. We lost around 800 graduates. We're not even, filling in for attrition for the most part right now, and so we spent $60 million on an app, and I'm just wondering, is it Treasury Board or is it the minister, or who is refusing to put extra money into training? And has there been actually any estimates done on training to bring our numbers of our officers up? When we have the Gordie Howe International Bridge built here in the next year, there'll be an increase of staffing. So what's going to happen is we're already on mandatory overtime and a series of things. So we're going to have problems in the New York area. in Buffalo area, right at Niagara Falls, and in the Toronto GTA area, and then down here and across the country, of course, as well. So my question would be to the $60 million for the Arrive Can. Is there more money allocated for any of this, or can we redistribute some of that surplus money, if there is any, to go to training officers? Because we need people on the ground more than we need an app.
I'm not sure if the question is for the Treasury Board Secretary. That I would say that you would have to talk to CBSA to get more information in terms of the efforts that have been made to raise this important issue you're raising.
So, well, I guess then was it Treasury Board that made up the difference, or did it come from CBSA to have to make up the loss of the $60 million?
I can try and answer that. The funding for all of the expenditures linked to Arrive Can, so the development of the app and the cloud and all of those were mostly funded through the existing budgets of both the Public Health Agency of Canada and the Canada Border Services Agency. I'm not sure I understand the connection you're making to the loss of money, so I apologize. I could just tell you where I know the money came from.
I'm going to leave it there, but you will have another 2 minutes down the road if you allow me to do that now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Turning now to Mr. Nader, I understand you're going to start off for your side. Over to you, 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I just have a couple quick questions for the Treasury Board Secretariat. In response to a question I had the last time Treasury Board appeared before us, in a written response, it was provided that the Public Service Peace Act strike resulted in a $352 million reduced expenditure from salary and benefits not paid to striking employees. My question is, where did that money go? That $352 million in savings, what happened to it?
I'm not sure I can answer the question today. I prepare public accounts. So
would you be willing to provide us with a written response of
Yes.
where the $352 million savings was reallocated?
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Second question, and hopefully it's fairly brief, but in written response to another question that I asked at the last time Treasury Board Secretariat was before us, the Treasury Board wrote in response that GC Strategies had a $47,324 contract for informatics services. Can you confirm that work was actually done for that $47,324 contract with GC Strategies?
So on this subject, what I would suggest is next week, my colleagues will be here appearing on the topic of Arrive Can, so that would be a great place to ask the question.
But could you commit in providing us with a written response in the meantime?
In the meantime, or?
Well,
as soon as possible.
Okay.
It might well be redundant, but I take your point. So, Mr. Viersen, you have the floor for 3.5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. I was just wondering if the Department of Finance could provide, in written form, how much carbon tax or carbon pricing has been collected over the last 4 years, and break it off into their 4-year increments, and then how much has been paid out through that same program to individuals, businesses, First Nations, Indigenous communities across the country. I'd love to see a breakdown of that. So,
I'd like to get acknowledgement from the witnesses. That was directed at Finance, was it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Department of Finance.
Acknowledged.
Thank you. Good. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I want to pick up where my colleague is to the Export Development Canada, this Accenture company. Export Development Canada, as its name suggests, is about facilitating Canadians' desire to maybe export their products around the world. Is that not correct?
That is correct.
Yeah. One interesting thing is a part of the CEBA rollout by Accenture is that they were getting. Well, first of all, could you clarify that it was a sole source contract to Accenture? Is that correct?
Yes, it was.
Is that normal for this kind of a thing?
There was different components to the contract, which I guess no one anticipated at the start. So once we had started with them, it was imperative to keep the continuation because the program had to stay operational for the participants. I would say over time, with a profile of 3 years, often you would look to go out to perhaps look at different options. But during the period that CEBA was in operation, we didn't have that optionality.
Okay. Now, you said that there was 31 contracts with this. Were all of them sole sourced?
Yes, they were.
Okay. Was it under like a special emergency recommendation that they were sole sourced, or is this just under a regular practice?
So at the time, this was April 2020, that we were asked to administer the program and get it up and running as fast as possible to support the companies that needed the facilities. So that's when we went out and sole sourced it. We had an arrangement with Accenture that was supporting EDC on other matters. So that meant that we were able to avoid what would be a 6 to 8 month RFP procurement cycle to actually get the funding into the hands of companies that need it at that point in time.
Okay. So was it? I didn't quite catch that. Was it an emergency, like under the general emergencies of COVID that this was? Is that or is it just a
the
general?
CEBA program was considered for EDC. It was for us a directive and then under ministerial authorization.
Okay. Now, there's been reports that
brief question, Mr. Viersen.
This company, One Financial, was subcontracted by Acerta, which is based in Brazil. Is that correct? And were there other foreign companies that were then subcontracted by Accenture?
It's not a subcontracting, given that it is a subsidiary of Accenture. So this is with respect to the loan accounting system, which will be able to facilitate the collection and the repayment of CEBA amounts from the loan holders, specifically.
Appropriate?
That is the time, I'm afraid.
Thanks.
We're over limit. Turning to Ms. Bradford, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please, Ms. Bradford.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the vast array of witnesses today here with your excellent testimony. We appreciate that. I'd like to start perhaps with Ms. Lavery. There was a question asked earlier about the call center and the volume of calls. You probably don't know this off the top of your head, but could you undertake to provide us maybe with facts and figures for the call centers and the calls that it received month by month, maybe during the COVID period? Presumably.
Yes, we can, because that was tracked daily at the time.
Right. Okay, that would be great. Super. Now, looking at, this would be for the Department of Finance. There's been a lot of talk lately about the CEBA loans and the repayment and everything. What is the repayment rate of the CEBA loans?
Did you hear that answer?
Yes, yes. Okay. And what flexibility is being offered to CEBA holders who were unable to meet the January deadline? Pardon? What?
Sorry, I think there was a misunderstanding. She wanted to answer.
Oh, pardon me.
Yes.
Oh,
I don't
pardon me.
care who answers. I just want to know the answer. It doesn't matter to me who answers.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chair. So today we are officially the receipt of 26.1 million of funds with respect to CEBA, and that equates to $6.5 billion of forgiveness on the CEBA program. Of course, the period by which companies can still work with their banks to perhaps refinance the loan has not expired yet. That will expire at the end of March. And the banks have a time delay in providing data to us, so we do expect to see some additional funds come in from the date that that official data responds to.
So a figure that I hear bandied around a bit, it says that 80% of small businesses who took the CEBA loan repaid it within the deadline. Does that seem approximately correct?
Yes, the deadline was the 18th of January this year. And indeed, we are seeing data. We do not have the official data in from the banks, but it is in the range of 75 to 80% have repaid and taken benefit of the forgiveness.
Okay, thank you. Now, for the Auditor General, professional and special services is a broad category of spending. Can you break down what is included under that, professional and special services? What would that cover?
Do you mean the line item in the public accounts?
Right,
The government's financial statements? I think that you should ask the Controller General's office. They would be well positioned to answer what's made up in that line.
There's various components that are part of professional and special services. It includes business services, management consulting, training, legal services, translation. So there's approximately 12 different categories.
Okay, so for the Department of Finance, or maybe the Auditor General, whoever knows the answer to this, the climate change is causing an increase in extreme weather events, which of course are very costly, and the federal government is supporting the provinces when the burden is greater than their ability to recover. Can someone inform the committee on the cost of those disasters for the federal government through its different programs? Who would know that? If no one knows, maybe.
So we don't have that at our fingertips. There would be different types of programs, and I don't know if you mean the disaster assistance financial arrangements or something more broad where there have been specific measures. But we can, pool our efforts and come back with something comprehensive of
If
that
you could, yes,
category.
if you could send us something in writing, that would be good. In the public accounts, there were approximately $26 billion related to Indigenous claims. And what impact did this have on the deficit? And do you feel that this funding is important?
I'll take that question. Thank you for your question and for drawing attention. That was a new and more specific disclosure in the past volume of the public accounts. It is in that 22-23 year, there was an unusual and an exceptional amount of contingent liabilities that were recognized as expenditures in relation, in particular, to Indigenous claims, historical wrongdoing, and redress efforts. We thought the government thought it was important to be transparent about a number like that. It's clearly an indication of the advancement of a number of priorities on fronts related to reconciliation. It was fiscally quite significant, and so the specific information was provided.
Thank you. I'm afraid that is the time. So we're now going into our third round, and as I mentioned before, these will be slightly truncated. Government members and official opposition will each have 4 minutes, and they will each have 2 slots. The NDP and the Bloc will have 2 minutes each. Turning now to Mr. Lawrence, you have the floor for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, and my comments will be directed towards the Treasury Board, and my questions will be much similar to the ones I asked the Auditor General. And the Auditor General, I think, said that she's reflected on some of the issues that have happened. Of course, she's one of the last line of defense. You're a little bit further up the food chain, as it were, but I believe it's underneath your responsibility to make sure that taxpayer dollars are spent well. The $16 million, at least, or we think, that's spent on it, did that represent good use of taxpayers' money? And what regrets do you have?
So in our role at the Treasury Board Secretariat, we have the policies and control frameworks in place and the delegation to departments and deputy heads in terms of the internal control they have to put in place. And I'm reassured in a way that the controller, the Auditor General, has recognized that the control framework and the policies we have in place are at the adequate level, and the majority of the departments are managing the public funds appropriately, and public servants are doing a good job. We are very concerned with what has been found and taking that very seriously. And we are pleased that the departments are agreeing with the recommendations and putting the recommendations, the action plans in place to address this for the future for Canadians. So.
That being said, I think that's cold comfort to our to taxpayers who saw $60 million. wasted on, depending on which number you use, whether you use a $400,000 or $80,000 app, still it's millions of dollars that have been wasted. Are you saying that there's nothing the Treasury Board could have done to prevent this?
What I can say is that the frameworks that are in place in the delegations are at the right level in terms of not wanting to pull the government to a stop by having too many rules. However, there needs to be continued room for improvement, and that's what the Treasury Board Secretary is looking at with our
In your
ministry.
current regulatory framework, do you have restrictions or provisions that prevent someone from being a contractor as well as an employee?
I'm not the expert in that area of the policies, but our officials will be here next week and can be prepared to speak to.
In general, though, in public, like this is public accounts, so we're looking at the finances side. This is a framework issue. Would you undertake to provide us, if you don't have it off the top of your head, in writing, whether there are policies that prevent contractors from being also employees?
I can look into that.
Okay, thank you. And also, that same question to finance. Do you have within your department any policies that prevent contractors from also being employees?
What I want to offer on this question, and it would apply beyond finance, it would be for the whole public service. There is the Code of Values and Ethics that all public servants must comply with. This is an employment requirement. And it requires the ongoing daily consideration of potential conflicts of interest between your public service work and outside activities, outside employment activities, and other types of activities that you might be doing.
Then an individual from being a contractor as an employee?
So I don't want to pretend that I'm an expert in that code, but what it would, at a minimum, all of us would be required as public servants to think about, are my activities outside of my public service work in conflict with the work I do within the public service?
Thank you. That is the time, unfortunately. Turning now to Mr. Chen, you have the floor for up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With the rise of extreme weather events and natural disasters, tackling climate change is now more important than ever. The good news is that Canadians and Canadian businesses are ready to step up. In 2022, Export Development Canada set the goal of providing $10 billion in support for clean tech businesses in 2025. As of December 31st, 2023, EDC has exceeded its target by providing more than $12 billion in financing and insurance solutions. Through you, Mr. Chair, could you share how many businesses were supported through these investments and also provide some examples to our committee?
Yes, I will. Thank you for the question. So we support approximately 400. It's been incrementally growing each year, so I'm going to say in the 400 range. The primary contributor is renewable energy. There's a lot of renewable energies in the numbers that you quoted, which is our business facilitated of over $12 billion. But you would see other examples of clean water usage, lots of processes that actually make manufacturing processes more efficient. Anything that reduces the use of resources, whether that's electricity as a resource or water as a resource, we include that in our definition of clean technology. But over 400 Canadian companies.
Thank you. That is certainly great news. And I also understand that in 2021, EDC became the world's first export credit agency to commit to achieving net zero emissions by 2050. Could you share more details with our committee about this particular commitment, the progress that has been made so far, and what work lies ahead?
Yes, thank you for the question. So we were the first export credit agency, and indeed at COP28 last year, we also signed up to the first new be a founding member of the Net Zero Alliance of Export Credit Agencies under the banner of the GFANS Alliance. So we have also participating in that as well. So with our plans, we really have been working on this since well before we made the commitment to net zero, with taking the opportunity to reduce the carbon intensity of the portfolio that we support, and that included stopping the support of international financing of fossil fuels. Included within that. I'm pleased to announce we did set some targets to achieve in the period from 2018 baseline, and we have overachieved those as well. We have also gone with science-based targets to ensure that we continue to look at the support that we provide. But most importantly, which I think is really important for Canadian companies, we are there to help them on their journey and help them understand what it is that they need to think about and the risks, not only the risks to their business model by the effects of climate action, but how this also represents opportunities for Canadian companies in the international sphere, given the system of regulation in Canada, particularly around labour laws, given the abundance of clean energy in Canada. These are all selling points for Canadian companies now to be part of international supply chains. And we really, as companies start to really focus on Scope 3 emissions, we want to ensure that Canadian companies can access that. And to access that, they need to be understanding the advantages that they have here at home. So we're also working with them to try and help them promote their participation in international supply chains.
Thank you. That is the time for that round of questions. Madame Secrétaire Desgagnés, vous avez 2 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
2 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I summarize, I have had a lot of questions for everyone, but this is a very important one. So in 2020, CEBA was introduced and the EDC was given responsibility, and a non-competitive contract was given to Accenture because of the so-called emergency nature of the program. Treasury Board was able to involved in this and could be very parsimonious because eligibility was sometimes not confirmed. So if we look at this program, even though management was delegated to Accenture, even though businesses dealt directly with institutions that gave them $60,000 loans, the banks were very involved. So I really find it hard to understand how a government can set up a program during the pandemic, delegate it to an agency, and then that gets delegated to a company. I don't know why this company had to spend tens of millions of dollars to set up a call center and a website. So it really is astonishing. Very briefly, please. I would like to introduce the following motion that the Auditor General, Ms. Hogan, just a moment, I have to get the exact wording, that the committee call on the Auditor General and her office to investigate the roles and responsibility of the suppliers in this context. A question? We have already begun in looking into the program, and we are intending to make this public by November. There may be delays because we need the information and the financial data. So it's already underway. Okay, that's moving.
Floor. Pardon?
Mais la motion est sur le tapis.
Okay.
The motion has been introduced.
No, j'ai bien compris, mais...
I understand.
Mais donc,
no, hold on. Wait, attends une seconde.
Just wait a moment here.
You put it, or did you put it on notice? Pardon me, I understood you're putting on notice, but I could be wrong on that. So looking
Non, non, je la dépose tout de suite.
OK. Alors, juste une petite seconde.
So just a moment, please.
Just double checking. So we have a motion that has been moved. It's relevant to the business at hand. Yes, Ms. Shanahan.
Comme on vient d'entendre,
We've just heard the Auditor General. Well, to begin with, I think that everyone would like to see the motion and its wording in both languages. It would be useful for the to take into account the fact that the Auditor General has already begun an audit, and I don't really understand why my colleague wants to continue with her motion. I think that we should look at the motion. I don't think that we can make a decision right away. We haven't received the motion. No, not yet.
I think there was another member that wanted to speak to it. Did I see that? Mr. May, if you'd like to speak to it, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to. I did have my hand up, but MP Shanahan basically stole my thunder to a certain extent. But I would have liked to have heard the motion again in its specifics.
Peux-tu répéter votre motion en français, s'il vous plaît, puis.
We would like to have it in French. If you could just read it again, please. That the committee call on the Auditor General to prepare an audit, including the role of the suppliers, because what we are talking about today is more of value for money in this case. So, Ms. Hogan, I think it is the second aspect that is the most important. Yes, the program management is one aspect, but did taxpayers get value for money? And that's what I want to focus on, and that's why I'm maintaining my motion.
Send it around. Yes, Ms. Schiff, go ahead.
Could we suspend and have a look at that?
Well, it hasn't been sent, so let me. I'm going to propose a way forward here, and this is more for Madame Secrétaire. Is this something you would like to debate now, or given that there is an audit coming, given that the Auditor General is right here and has heard this, that not to say the committee spoken on it, is this something that we could pick up again after the recess, or do you feel it's pressing and should be dealt with now?
I think it would be important.
Puis, c'est quelque chose que moi,
This is something that I can tell you we could return to the motion on Tuesday, March 19th, because we don't yet
schedule in, because we have the auditor in that morning. So,
Suspend 30 secondes.
Bien sûr, wait.
Can we suspend 30 seconds?
We'll suspend for a minute. I'm going to ask the witnesses just to hold on a little bit. I appreciate your patience here. So we'll suspend for a minute to allow, or just 1 second. Has that gone out yet? Oh. We'll suspend for 2 minutes. Oh, just, I'm sorry, Mr. Massad, you have your hand up to speak on this?
Yeah, not on this, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I'll come back to you then. We're going to suspend for 2 minutes, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
If I could ask members to take their seats. We have a motion in front of us that I will read off, and then I will look for speakers. That the committee requests the Auditor General conduct an audit of the management of CEBA, including the roles and responsibilities of suppliers. Do I have any speakers? Mr. May, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have to say I'm just a lowly guest here today, filling in for my honourable colleague. But I do want to speak to this just a little bit, given what has just been added by the Auditor General in terms of the fact that this is something the Auditor General is looking into. We talked about this a little bit earlier in the meeting about potential the optics of this. The Auditor General is independent. We need to continue to strive for that independence, and we talked about financing and looking into having an independent financing model for the Auditor General. To suggest that we dictate what the Auditor General is to undertake in terms of study, I think is inappropriate. Number one, her interaction we just heard was that they're already looking into this. I think it makes this motion redundant, and any suggestion that we could be influencing the Auditor General through this, having her here today to then suggest that she undertake this study would also be inappropriate. I think too, and again, I'm just simply a guest here today, so I'm not sure the convention of this particular committee. But I have been in your seat, Mr. Chair, for a while, and whether it was Human Resources or whether it was Veterans Affairs, and I do know that there is a time and place for motions, and it is not when we have witnesses lined up. We are, and I'm going to be brief on this because I do very much would like to get two witnesses and not carve up their time any more than we have to. But I would ask that the member opposite, the honourable member, can reconsider pulling this motion, given the fact that the Auditor General is in fact already looking into to this as a potential study topic. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I look for other speakers. I'm just going to address this kind of from the chair, just diplomatically. On the first point, the auditor is independent, but does certainly respond to Parliament. And the ArriveCan audit came after the Parliament voted in favor of it. And I believe, reading the tea leaves and in discussion with the OAG, the auditor in the office also looks to this committee for what I'll call guidance. A motion that is passed unanimously on this committee is going to be given greater weight by the auditor than one that is split, but it is certainly not interference, and it is certainly not inappropriate for Parliament or this committee to pass these motions. And at the end of the day, Ms. Hogan will use her independence as she sees fit and pursue an audit or not. But on that first one, that has been the customs. The auditor has spoken many times about her office receives even correspondence from individual parliamentarians, and that's acceptable as well, and it's something the office considers. So for parliamentary committee to weigh in is not out of bounds. Second, on your point, this motion is, I too want to hear from witnesses. That's why we work so hard to get them here. But this motion is directly at the business at hand, and it is in order. And so if it had not been, we had a motion that came at the top of this meeting that I felt was not, and so it would have required UC. We didn't get that, so we moved on. But I take your point, Mr. May, about that. Are there any other speakers? Yes, Ms. Shanahan.
Oui, je pense que parce qu'on a eu.
I think that we had a discussion which went quite in depth about the motion. We heard from the Auditor General. I could suggest an amendment, if I can find it here. So I would suggest changing request to recommend. So the idea would be that it would come from our committee, not as a request, and it may be just a nuance, but it's not really a request, but we recommend. And then it is, falls in line with the work of the Auditor General. Would you consider that? Yes, I accept that recommendation for an amendment. Very well. So it changes one word. Right, in English it's request.
Amendment, any objections to changing en français to, pardon, c'est quoi le mot encore?
What was it? It was from to recommend.
Anyway, no. Any objection to that? No. Good. That has been amended. Any speakers to the motion? Let's call a vote, please, Madame Clerk. Roll call.
Shall the motion of Madame Saint-Clair-Desgagnés carry as amended? Ms. Bradford.
Abstain.
Mr. Chun.
Abstain.
Mr. May.
Abstain.
Ms. Shanahan.
Abstain.
Ms. Yip.
Abstain.
Mr. Viersen.
Yes.
Mr. Nader.
Yes.
Mr. Genuis.
Yes.
Madame Saint-Clair-Desgagnés.
Oui.
And Mr. Massey.
We.
Five yeas.
The motion is passed. I appreciate the witnesses remaining. I'm going to turn now to Mr. Massey. You have 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. And I think my question, I want to go to the Auditor General, please. I was shocked, I think, with a lot of people in December when the Conservatives singled out and voted against the completion of the Gordie Howe Bridge, specifically a line item vote of $335 million. And the project has had billions already put into it, not only the roadway there, but also it literally would become the world's most expensive viewing platform, albeit would be notarized by being on the American and Canadian side, because at that time in December, it was just finishing connecting, was still not done yet. It's now connected. But since that time, we've also had Bridging North America and the Government of Canada reach an additional funding agreement of $700 million, where the government could have insisted that they lived up to the original contract, but went ahead and renegotiated this P3. So my question would be, would this be something in line that the potential to study? Because I believe this is new funding, and I thought we were past this, unfortunately, because originally Conservatives supported the DRTP, which was a rail tunnel through the South Windsor. The Liberals under Joe Volpe were opposed to this project in the past, and I thought we were past all these things. And I'm worried that there'll be additional funds that maybe get thrown through the wash cycle, and also the contract has been amended versus that it lived up to.
I have to admit, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what the question was in the end, but I can tell you that we do the financial audit of the bridge, the corporation. But when it comes to funding, that is a government decision that's made. We simply audit the financial statements of the bridge.
Okay, so the real quick, the question is about, we have another changed contract that the government has done with the P3 sector. So the government has amended its contract. I'm just wondering whether that came after all these things took place, and we have to put another $700 million in, whatever it might be. But we've amended the contract. I'm just wondering if the AG office would look at amended contracts that the government had with P3s, because they have been looked at in the past.
So we wouldn't specifically target that, and we don't have that slated as an audit, a performance audit, but we would look at the management of the public-private partnership when we do the financial statement audit of the bridge.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
That is.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And just to bring everyone up to speed, if you lost track, we have two more individuals, Mr. Viersen for 4, and then I believe Mr. May for 4 minutes at the end to round us out. Mr. Viersen, you have the floor for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just would like the Treasury Board to answer a few questions around emergency contracting authority that's given to ministers. How often has that happened in the last 4 years? And is this something that most has this been authorized to many ministries? Or I think the report I read was just that the Ministry of Public Works had gotten this authorization, but I'm wondering if they actually used it and if other ministries have pursued this.
I don't have the information. You could ask my colleagues next week when they come. The contracting expert will be here.
Okay. Looked like the Auditor General wanted to jump in on that.
Well,
Give her the floor.
what I could offer up is during the audit of the ArriveCan, we know that some of the contracts that were issued invoked the emergency exemption, a national security emergency exemption, which means that certain requirements in the normal procurement processes don't have to happen. So certain compliance with certain elements. So I know that it was used there. How often it is used across the government is not a question that I can answer, but I can tell you it was used during the ArriveCan for sure.
Could you confirm that the authorization to use it had been given? They were probably saying
we did see communication and authorization around that,
Okay.
linked to some of the contracts in ArriveCan, but off the top of my head, I can't tell you if it was invoked in all of them or.
Okay, because sometimes one group does their homework on it, and the next group just sees that they're doing that and uses the same authorization. You didn't really see.
To my recollection, we did not see that. We saw it being invoked in certain contracts and cited and used between Canada Border Services Agency on Public Service and Procurement Canada. We definitely saw that the authority was there to use the exemption.
Okay. I look forward to next week hearing from Treasury Board on this. Going back to Export Development Canada. Just when I got cut off last time, I was just asking around. There was I deemed it to be a subcontractor with this one financial. You said it was a subsidiary. Is it appropriate for Canadian companies to outsource their work to other parts of the world when they're receiving a government contract?
I don't feel equipped to answer that on behalf of all Canadian companies. With respect to government contracts.
Okay, so but was there anything in that agreement that Export Development Canada had with Accenture that barred them from? Because there's some report around that this one financial of Brazil was doing the work that Accenture had won the contract for, and you informed me that was not a subcontract. That was a. Is that appropriate for Accenture to?
So if I may answer your question a little bit differently, this was with respect to the loan accounting system, and there was a market scan done as to the providers that could accommodate the request and to support such a system, to support this number of loan holders, should it be required, the 898,000 loan holders. That scan was identified 24 companies. that went through a series of processes to identify what was the company that could meet the requirements in the time frame that we needed them to meet with. So there was actually a full scan done. And this company was identified that the one that met the requirements the most to actually meet the needs of delivering this loan accounting system.
Thank you. That is the time. Ms. Shanahan, you have the last 4 minutes, please.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you. And I, too, appreciate all the witnesses that have been here today answering our questions, which have been kind of all over the place, but that is the nature of looking at the public accounts. But I would like to learn more about the Development Finance Institute of Canada. So we have Ms. Laurie Kerr and David Bamchi. Yes. So I was looking up a little bit about your organization, that your mandate is to support private sector companies in developing markets to promote sustainable development. So perhaps, Ms. Kerr, can you tell us a little bit more about what you do and when you started, how it all came about?
Sure. Thank you so much for the question, and happy to share a little bit about FinDev Canada. So FinDev Canada, we're Canada's bilateral development finance institution. As you've said, we support financing and investment in emerging markets and developing economies. We work with the private sector. We're a wholly owned subsidiary of Export Development Canada, and our initial capitalization came in 2018 of $300 million. There was money in budget 2021 as well as under the Indo-Pacific strategy. But essentially what we do is we support investment and financing in emerging markets. As a financial institution, we also, as a development finance institution, we also look through a development impact lens. So we make our capital allocation decisions looking at climate and nature action, local market development, as well as gender equality and women's economic empowerment. We work through a number of different sectors. We support the financial industry in emerging markets and developing economies, so working with local and regional banks and investment funds. We work with agriculture and forestry in their value chains, and then in sustainable infrastructure. We ended the year last year with about $1 billion on our balance sheet. So in a 5-year growth period, we just celebrated our 5th anniversary. Over 5 years, we grew essentially from zero to $1 billion on our balance sheet.
Okay, well, that sounds like quite the story. Maybe just walk me through a few of the elements again. So is it private sector companies, Canadian companies that approach FinDev with projects that they want to do, or do you help them discover projects in emerging markets?
Sure. So maybe just a point of clarification is that we don't have what one might call a nexus mandate to support Canadian investment abroad in particular. We're in the business of supporting private development in emerging markets and developing economies. Should there be Canadians that invest abroad, that's fine, but the export promotion piece is really what EDC does. So we're about supporting development in emerging economies to support good quality jobs, to support raised incomes, tax revenue, et cetera, et cetera. So the way that transactions or deals come to us is through a number of different avenues. One, it's through our own networks in terms of the sponsor companies or the financial institutions that are looking to invest. We work a lot with partner entities as well, other development finance institutions around the world, as well as with the private sector directly in emerging markets. So opportunities come to us in a number of different ways.
And when you say the private sector, this would be for-profit, but would it also include maybe cooperatives or social finance entities?
Indeed. So as a development finance institution, we're an investor with impact. So again, we put that impact lens on everything we do. We in the sort of the ecosystem of financing, we occupy a space that sort of sits between commercially oriented finance and sort of more traditional aid. So we do support, look for companies and look for investment opportunities that will provide a return. But again, with that, that's required but not sufficient. There has to be development impact associated with those investments.
Okay. And what do you mean by development impact? Is actually contributing back into the community or funding schools, or what does that mean?
Indeed. Thank you for the question. So indeed, again, those three impact lenses that I mentioned around climate and nature action. So we would take a look at how is the particular company that we're investing in or the financial institution, how are they looking at climate risk or climate change from a risk as well as an opportunity perspective. So how are they either mitigating or adapting to climate change? When we look at local market development, we will look at things of what types of jobs are being provided. Are there jobs that are created for women-owned small and medium-sized enterprises, for example? Are we contributing to the development of local capital markets? So what's happening in the local economy that our investment through those businesses are contributing to? And then again, on the women's economic empowerment side, as I've mentioned, we would look at the quality of jobs that are provided. We'd look at how many women-owned, women-led MSMEs are provided, how many women are in leadership positions in a company, in management, on the board, things like that.
And
Thank you.
Do you say you have an impact? It might be interesting to have a performance audit.
Well, don't look at me.
On the FinDep. Yeah, we want to hear more.
I look forward to your motion on that matter. We're over our time. I want to thank all the witnesses for coming today so we could continue our study on the Public Accounts 2023. And we'll see some of you very soon. And the others, I wish you a nice evening. Thank you very much. And I'm going to suspend for 5 minutes as we just prepare for our next witness. Conformément à l'article 108.3G du règlement, le comité reprend l'examen du rapport 1 ArriveCan renvoyé au comité le lundi 12 février 2024. And I'd like to welcome our witness from the Customs Immigration Union, Mark Weber, National President. Mr. Weber, thank you for your patience. We're a little behind schedule, but I'm going to turn things over to you right away for a 5-minute opening. I see most of the members are here. So without further ado, you have the floor for up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today as National President of the Customs and Immigration Union, which represents personnel working for the CBSA, including frontline border services officers. For many of our members or anyone familiar with CBSA management, the Auditor General's report on the ArriveCan procurement process will not have come as a surprise. This is not because our members were involved in the development of the application or in the procurement process that led to the ongoing debacle. They were not, nor were they consulted about the usefulness of such an endeavor. Had they had a chance to do so, they would have surely informed the agency's management of ArriveCan's futility. Rather, much of what the Auditor General's office found resonated with our members because they are all too well acquainted with the agency's labor relations practices. In her opening statement to this committee, the Auditor General noted the glaring disregard for basic management practices uncovered during that audit. As our members know, this disregard for proper managerial procedure is deeply embedded within the agency, be it in terms of the profound lack of accountability found at all management levels, of the tendency to retaliate against employees for speaking up, or of the poorly run, arbitrary internal investigation and disciplinary process. CBSA management's track record speaks for itself. While keen on punishing its lower-level employees at the slightest allegation, the agency routinely turns a blind eye to far more serious breaches within management. The situation within the Security and Professional Standards Directorate, responsible for internal investigations, is especially egregious, with the Directorate showing little understanding of the basic principles of procedural fairness. Reform is badly needed to ensure the integrity of a process that should be fair, transparent, and unbiased, and yet is anything but. It should come as no surprise, then, that the procurement process that led to ArriveCan would be fraught with issues, and it should come as no surprise that the resulting product has been found to be of poor value to Canadians. What must be stressed is how this poor value extends far beyond the mere economic aspect. ArriveCan, in its current form, actively undermines the security of Canadians by removing crucial interactions between officer and traveller. It's the cornerstone of CBSA's border modernization strategy, which focuses entirely on facilitation with little thought for the safety and security of our communities. The reality is that ArriveCan was far from a necessity in the first place. It is both the result and the continuation of a steady erosion of our federal public service, which has seen our ability to react in times of crisis drastically reduced over the years. This decline has been hastened by policies such as the Conservatives' Deficit Reduction Action Plan back in 2014, where thousands of public service workers were removed, including about 1,100 border services officers. At the border, the same decline has been further fueled by current administration's focus on inefficient technology and the hiring of more and more managers at the expense of officers. With important security matters at the forefront of national discussion, such as stolen cars, gun smuggling, the opioid crisis, etc., it is extremely galling to see the agency squander, in the worst possible way, nearly $60 million on an app that ultimately does very little. It's irresponsible to inject such funds into a project of this kind instead of hiring much-needed additional staff or seeking to improve existing infrastructure, which would bring real value to Canadians. This is to say little of the agency's decision to spend dozens of millions of dollars on the private sector instead of choosing to invest in its workers and reinforcing their capacity to act on behalf of Canadians. At a time where our members are being nickel and dimed at the bargaining table, this is nothing less than a slap in the face. CIU members are proud of the work they do to serve Canadians and of their role as Canada's first line of defence. Yet CBSA management's actions continue to cast a shadow on the organization as a whole. The Auditor General's report brings to light what many of our members have known for a long time. I urge the federal government, along with CBSA, to seize this opportunity to change course. Canadians are owed an agency built on solid principles where the front line is properly supported to ensure the security of all. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Just 1 second, please. Very good. So, Ms. Genuis, I know you're moving a motion. You're not subbed in, so you're going to speak to your whip. I will turn the floor over to your 5 minutes, and you can sort that out. Or you can turn the time over to someone who is subbed
Chair,
in.
I'm going to make a few introductory comments, and the email is on its way from the whip's office. Thank you, Mr. Weber, for sharing with us, again, consistent with testimony we've heard from many, just about what a broken process ArriveCan has been from start to finish. I will note in particular your observations that internal investigations are arbitrary, and also that there has been a problem of retaliation against those who make complaints. At the Government Operations Committee, we had 2 public servants make some allegations in response to questions they were asked. And almost immediately after their testimony, they were told there was an investigation against them, and they were subsequently suspended without pay following their testimony to a parliamentary committee. And that raises significant concerns about our ability to get to the bottom of matters related to ArriveScam when there is an appearance of retaliation specifically against witnesses when they give testimony critical of the government and others within CBSA. And I'm sure we'll be able to come back to you shortly. I earlier in this meeting, I tried to move a motion to summon Mr. David Yao to this committee in another outrageous revelation related to ArriveScam. We found that a contractor's company, Dalian, another 2-person company that made off like bandits during ArriveScam that got $7.9 million. And we still don't have any sense of what they actually did, if anything, for that money. They got $7.9 million while David Yao, one of the 2 people working at the company, was also an employee at the Department of National Defense. The Department of National Defense had contracts with Dalian as well. The department and the relevant agencies purport not to know enough about who works for them to have been able to notice this problem earlier. So recognizing the urgency of the matter and the need to get to the bottom of it, I do want to give my government colleagues one more opportunity to do the right thing. We tried to move this motion before. They blocked our ability to do so, but they have fewer procedural tools available to them now because it is the matter at hand. So I will move that the committee issue a summons for Mr. David Yao to appear before committee within 7 days and for at least 2 hours. And I hope we'll be able to have the quick support of the committee to get this done and be able to proceed with that summons.
We will send that out forthwith. Any speakers to this motion?
Can we suspend while we're waiting for the motion to be?
Yes, we can.
Yes. No.
Sure, we don't need to suspend. This motion
No.
was put on verbal notice prior that we've had suspension.
I appreciate it, Mr. Generous. The clerk is just checking to see if your team has sent it in both official languages. It's not. It's so. We do have it, and we'll have it out to you very shortly. I will. Yes, to answer your question, I'm going to suspend about 2 minutes here.
Mr. Chair, could I ask a quick question?
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
pardon me, Mr. You had your hand before. Yes, so I'm okay. I didn't hit the gavel yet, so yes, we're still in. You're fast on the draw there. Go ahead, please.
Sorry to interrupt, but at any rate, the practice of industry committee is, from all parties, is that we usually invite a witness first, and then we summons later. So I'm just wondering, and I'm a guest of this committee. Did this committee request the person already?
Sorry, what was your question again?
So has this committee already requested Mr. Yao to come already? Because we just actually summons the CEOs of TELUS, Rogers, and Bell because they were asked, and we always ask first, and then if they don't come or refuse, then we summons. I'm just wondering if this has been asked before. Sorry for my ignorance.
Yeah, give me a second. Hold on. Yeah, that's I think a valid question, Mr. Massey. We don't have that protocol. It might be worth exploring it. So I'm going to allow the motion to stand, and we'll debate it. We're just in the process of sending it out, and it's out. So I don't even need to suspend. We managed to. Well, I will still suspend to give I'm going to suspend for a minute just to give members a chance to look at it, and then we'll jump into. And Mr. Weber, I do apologize for this. I am anxious to hear questions around your statement, but I am a servant of this committee, and a motion has been moved, and I hope we can deal with it quickly. So, we'll come back to you in 1 minute. Gently bring the meeting back into order, and I will certainly give members a few seconds to come back to their seats before we hear debate on this. Ms. Shanahan, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. And I don't know if Mr. Massey still wanted to have a few words, but I certainly appreciated what Mr. Massey had to say about the usual practice of committees in having witnesses appear before us. And of course, the first thing is, and my apologies to Mr. Weber, is that when we invite a witness, that we actually take the time to ask questions and hear what the witness has to say. And yet here you are, you're being subjected to what is the wish of a member
point of order, Mr. Chair.
To interject into.
Mr. Generous, what is the point of order?
Yeah, I just want to clarify the process. That
no,
if
you don't need to do that.
With the vote, we would go directly back to the witness.
Mr. Generous, that is not a point of order. Ms. Shanahan is entitled to her rhetorical flourishes here, and I will turn the floor back to her.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. And so indeed, our normal practice, especially in this committee, Public Accounts, which is a committee that historically has worked on a consensual basis. One of the longtime NDP members, Mr. Christopherson, used to say that you should not be able to tell when a member of the Public Accounts Committee was asking a question which party they came from, because we're doing the work here of examining the public accounts of Canada as they are put forward by the Auditor General's Office, which is tasked with the job of not only presenting the financial statements in accordance to the usual accounting procedures, but also to perform, and I think that's something that evolved in the last 30 years or so, the performance audits, value for money audits of different departments. And so because we study the work, the reports of the Auditor General, it's normally pretty straightforward who we have, Chair, you'll agree, at our meetings. It's the Auditor General, her team, with the relevant department officials, being the Deputy Minister of the department that is the subject of the report. And those are our witnesses, and they are asked to appear, and there's no summonsings of witnesses because they are asked to appear, they're happy to appear, and our committee team works out the times and the modalities of those appearances. And yet we have seen in this session of Parliament a trend toward asking witnesses kind of outside those parameters. And yet it has still been the practice of this committee to request, as I would think that the current witness was requested. He was not summoned or subpoenaed to come to this committee. It's only a matter of respect for the people that appear before this committee that we do so. And so, in the case of, and I'm looking at the text of the motion that we have before us, that the committee issue a summons for Mr. David Yeo to appear before committee within 7 days for at least 2 hours. Again, this being sprung on this committee, that this is something that is of an urgency to do. There's no prior consultation with the committee. But I find it very interesting that the member is very keen to have this person, as we are all just learning about who this person is. Apparently, this employee of the Department of Defense, the materials section or something, having started or gotten involved in this company, Dalian, he also had other activities. Apparently, he was active in political life as a candidate for the People's Party of Canada, and was very outspoken about his anti-vax views, and was somebody that had a very public persona. And I'm not saying that I wouldn't welcome the chance to ask this gentleman some particular questions, but I find that it's very interesting that my colleagues who have been trying to paint this whole ArriveCAN situation, which is a very serious business. We've been hearing from the proper witnesses in procurement and from the Auditor General's office and from public procurement department and so on about how procurement should take place, that my conservative colleagues have been calling it, liberal insiders, and yet here we see this David Yeo is anything but a liberal insider, and in fact, I just wonder if there's not maybe he's a future conservative candidate. I don't know, but I would be curious to question this person indeed. But I think even this gentleman should have the respect of this committee in asking him to appear. It could be that he'll be very eager to come and speak to this committee. It could be that he's just chomping at the bit to do so, may have lots to say, but it's something that should be done within the normal scope of the work we do here, which I agree has now included us having multiple meetings during constituency weeks. But, the work of the nation must be done, and we're certainly here to do it, although you'll appreciate, Chair, that we won't always be here in person, but we know that you will be here, faithful to your post, and making sure that all of these questions are being asked to all of these people so that we can, in some ways, and I'm always concerned, just to be serious, I'm always concerned that we don't undermine the serious work, the objective professional work that is done by people like the Auditor General and the procurement ombuds by kind of running a sideshow on that's feeding media headlines and really running up the tab, I would say. This committee has always worked in a very orderly and systematic manner, making sure that we cover off all the bases in the work that we have to do. But with these meetings occurring now during constituency weeks, requiring travel, because I know that our conservative colleagues are very diligent to their post and will come in person. So the travel costs, the cost of having the staff here, the cost of operating a meeting, I've heard it's somewhere around $10,000, excluding the individual cost per meeting. And so this is on top of all of the money that we're very much concerned about that has been wasted in the ArriveCan. And I am curious, we heard the opening remarks from our witness here. I would very much like to have been able to question him about the side of the employees who actually have to deal with the ArriveCan app to see how it actually operated in real time. So I really I don't know that I'm sure that there's colleagues that want to be able to express themselves on this issue, but again, going back to this motion, I cannot support it
Point
as
of order,
it stands.
Point of order.
Because
Just 1 second, Ms. Shanahan. I do have Mr. Massey. I will note, Mr. Massey. I do see you there. So yes, Mr. Brock. And if it's a point of order.
Point of order. If Ms. Shanahan was actually sincere about her desire to get to the ArriveCan issue and allow Mr.
Brock,
Weber to speak,
I will put you on the list to speak.
We would be listening to the filibuster.
Mr. Brock, that is not a point of order. I will put you down after Mr. Massey. Ms. Shanahan, you have the floor. Mr. May, was that a wave or is that a request to speak? All right, you're down as well. Ms. Shanahan, you have the floor again.
It's the wording of the motion, Chair, that I object to. This summons, this dramatic summons of this person. This is not becoming to the procedures and process that this committee usually undergoes, and it's something that we had a motion just previous presented by the member, Madame Sinclair de Gagné of the Bloc Québécois. And if I can just switch en français un peu, parce que je vois.
I'm just going to speak in French a bit because I see that Marie-Hélène Gaudreau is here with us. We were able to discuss the motion that was introduced by Ms. Sinclair de Gagné, and that was the proper way to do things in a committee. To talk about things, even if we aren't always in agreement, we can discuss matters and come to a result that works for everyone. This really isn't the case in this most recent motion that was introduced by Mr. Genuis. He tried to do it very quickly because he thinks we might be sleeping on the job, but that is not the case at all. But as I have said, Mr. Chairman, it might be a really interesting meeting, but I think we should request the person to come. I think that the way that witnesses have been treated in some cases by some of the members from the official opposition, the way they've treated civilians, if we can call them, or civil servants, is really shameful. The way people have been treated, they've been even harassed in their private lives. So I think I will stop there, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
I'm going to look for agreement here. I can see where this is going. I am inclined to excuse Mr. Weber because it is coming up to supper time. Is there any objection to that? Mr. Weber, I'm going to apologize. Personally, I was actually looking forward to hearing from you, and I'm going to ask the clerk to work with you to see if there's another time we could ask you to come back, not summons, ask you to come back. I live in a border community, and I know the good work that your officers do, not only day-to-day but throughout COVID. And so I was very curious to hear your thoughts on this. I've spoken to some of those officers directly and have a sense of some of the things you might have said, but wanted to hear it from you. So with your indulgence, I will excuse you and work to have you back very soon if you're inclined to do so. But again, I appreciate it, and I do apologize for this, but I hope you understand this is sometimes how democracy works.
I do. Thank you. Anytime.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Turning now to Mr. Massa, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm quite frankly disappointed that we didn't get to hear from Mr. Weber more, but he represents thousands of workers who every single day put their lives on the line, and he can't sit through this setting right here. And at the same time, we've just missed incredibly important testimony as the CBSA union right now is short 2,000 to 3,000 workers alone. And I'm really think that we've missed an important opportunity. And most recently, they were actually left out of the whole summit with regards to gun control, and auto theft on the Montreal port. They weren't even invited. And Mr. Weber also has really excellent testimony about the pattern of what's taken place. We've seen over the years, and since I've been a member of Parliament, we actually had them in the Windsor region borrowing vests, bulletproof vests. And it's gone to the point right now in Montreal where they just took equipment to scan for stolen automobiles out of Windsor because they haven't fixed the ones in Montreal that are broken. And we're not going to hear his other testimony that I'm sure Mr. Weber would have had, because he's also identified that with their ArriveCan app, they didn't actually, we could have used that money for hiring staff. So during COVID, we didn't have training that went on. So we're short 800 from just that alone, and we were already short. And there's been a habitual problem with conservative and liberal governments not even settling the negotiations and contracts with the men and women at the border. That's been something that's been ongoing for decades. They literally finish a contract and have to go back into negotiation because it takes years to get done. And unfortunately, we're not going to hear that testimony today. Perhaps there will be in the future. I remember going out, and it's so political, out to Vancouver when I was trying to protect the detector dog program. The Conservatives were cutting at that time. Yes, they cut the detector dog program. And I was supposed to tour in the Vancouver port. And all of a sudden, there was a phone call somewhere, someplace. I was not allowed to go into the Vancouver port by the Port Authority. They rescinded my invitation once it was learned that I was actually going there. So the union took me around anyways, all around the perimeter and so forth. And we learned about the loss of the detector dogs that now actually, would take 3 hours to clear a freighter. Now it can take 3 weeks. And
Mr. Massey, Mr. Massey, I appreciate your frustration. I'm just going to gently nudge you back to the motion at hand.
Yes.
It is my intention to have Mr. Weber back because, like you, I represent a border community and do want to hear from him and his members. So if I could just nudge you back to the motion at hand. Thank you.
Fair enough, and I'll wrap up soon. And thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an important issue for me, and I know you're a border person as well too. So back to the main motion. OGO is looking at this as well too. I think this is not the best practice is to summon someone before they're actually been invited to appear. I'm
Point of order, Chair.
I hear a point of order, Mr. Massey. Yes, Mr. Nader.
And I know this isn't typically a procedural point of order, but I would note that it has been officially announced the former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney has passed away. And I think all members would offer our condolences to the Prime Minister's family.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So thank you, Mr. Nader, for that update.
Yeah, that's Mr. Chair. At this point, also too, if that's the case, then I think that perhaps maybe we should consider adjournment out of respect to the Mulroney family. That's just my thoughts on that matter.
Just 1 sec, please.
I'll leave it out. I'll leave it out there for people to decide. And I'm done then. Fine. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, we're going to proceed to a vote to adjourn the meeting. It's my intention to adjourn the meeting.
Shall the meeting be adjourned? Ms. Bradford?
Yes.
Mr. Chen?
Yes.
Mr. May?
Yes.
Ms. Shanahan?
Yes.
Ms. Yip? Yes. Mr. Vierson?
Yes.
Mr. Nader?
Yes.
Mr. Brock?
Yes.
Madame Sinclair Desgagnés?
Oui.
Mr. Massey?
Yes, with condolences to the Mulroney family.
11 yeas.
Thank you. Before I drop the gavel, just a couple of notices. So you have all likely received the update that the Auditor General will be tabling reports on March 19th when we come back after the recess. Again, there will be a 2-hour lockup starting at 7 a.m. And then the auditor will come in to take questions from all parliamentarians in an ad hoc setup. And she will table her reports, or her reports will be tabled at approximately 10 a.m. And it's my intention that morning to have a meeting beginning at 10:05. So the auditor's first comments on her report will be presented to this committee. That will last only about an hour that morning. Some of you have, and we're going to meet next week. I'm going to lay it out now in terms of the dates so you compare your calendars and your substitutions. We're going to meet Tuesday, mid to late afternoon. That will allow at least members that live closely to come in that day. And that's the afternoon of Tuesday, March 5th, and then the mornings of both March 6th and 7th at 10 a.m. You will have the notices of those meetings shortly. I just wanted to highlight that to everyone so you're at least able to prepare your calendars. On that note, this meeting is adjourned.